Welcome, Diana. How are
Okay.
you?
Thank you so much for joining us. You're connected to audio. Look, you're just kidding. Okay, good. We both kind of know you by now, but again, Jonathan Cohn.
Hi, Jonathan. It's great to see you. Hi, everybody. Great to see you.
Great. And so I'll kick it off by asking you a question that you've probably heard many times on the trail by now. I'll just kind of take maybe, let's say, 2 minutes or so to tell us who you are, why you're running, kind of all that jazz.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for everything that you do at Progressive Mass for progressives and everybody across the board here in Massachusetts. I really respect and value your work, and it's great to be here with you today. My name is Diana DiZoglio. I am a state senator from the Merrimack Valley running for state auditor because I believe that working families deserve access to and accountability from state leaders and state agencies, regardless of our family background, our bank balance, or our zip code. I was born to a 17-year-old single mom. A lot of you know my story. I grew up housing insecure, cleaned houses and waitressed my way through our local community college and worked hard and earned scholarships to Wellesley College to become the first in my family to graduate. Without the investments of others, though, I would not have had the opportunities I did. So I know how important it is that investments made into state government through our tax dollars are taken seriously and that they're used wisely. Because every wasted dollar puts another child's future opportunities at risk. And I don't need to tell anyone on this call this, but there are enough barriers to access. I want to ensure that Beacon Hill isn't one of those barriers. But right now, Massachusetts, for as progressive as we are here in the state of Massachusetts, our state government continues to be ranked by almost every good government group as the least transparent and accessible of any state government in the nation. We are not subject to open meeting laws. We're exempt to public records laws. Committee votes are not public. Taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreements continue to silence government workers about workplace abuse, and power is centralized into the hands of just a few people. When you add to that the fact that this administration's policies currently feed a self-sustaining status quo, we have a really big equity, transparency, and accountability problem. There are many situations where people with generational access to power continuously prosper. Their friends who look and sound like them are rewarded, and the most vulnerable people are continually pushed aside and marginalized. So I want to be an auditor who opens up state government to everyone and shifts the balance of power back to working people. I've been a small businesswoman, was chief of staff at the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts. I've led various community programs at nonprofits and have been working in the legislature now for going on 10 years, going line by line in that state budget, again, fighting for working families. And I have a proven track record of tackling tough issues on important matters such as climate change, education, access to healthcare, and have also led the charge on issues of transparency on Beacon Hill, because if there's one thing that I've learned as a self-employed house cleaner, it is that sunlight really is the best disinfectant. And my comprehensive social justice and equity audit plan seeks to shine a light on where we need to start making changes again, so that all families in Massachusetts have a seat at the table, regardless of our family background, our bank balance, or our zip code. And I will turn it back over to you, Jonathan. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to toss it to Zayda for our next question.
Great. Hi. Hi. Nice meeting you, Diana. I haven't gotten the chance.
Hi, Zayda. Great to meet you.
So you're here with us today at Progressive Mass. And so I'm curious to know, starting off, what does progressive mean to you? And what do you see as our biggest obstacles to achieving progressive change in the Commonwealth?
Progressive. What does progressive mean to me? Progressive means making progress, learning and educating each other on what it means to actually uplift our communities regarding our shared values. Like I said, I was born to a 17-year-old single mom, grew up housing insecure. We had substance use disorder in our family, domestic violence, amongst other things that many families across our Commonwealth also face challenges with. Making progress, I think, is a cornerstone of being a progressive. I can tell you that through the years, I haven't always held the positions that I currently hold, but due to listening and learning from others who have been willing to help to educate me on some very important issues, I myself have been able to make progress as an elected leader here in this Commonwealth. And I think that that is what being a progressive is. It's making sure that we're listening, that we're learning, and that we're educating ourselves continually alongside of those that the issues we are voting on or making decisions about impact the most.
Great, thank you. And when I get over to the kind of the office itself, so the state auditor doesn't make law him or herself, but uncovers problems that require either legislative or regulatory action to fix. So what are some audits that you'd prioritize, and how would you make sure that any necessary follow-up actions are codified into law if necessary?
Yeah, so I think the follow-up is incredibly important, and thanks for bringing it up. Something that's part of my social justice and equity audit plan is the desire to conduct follow-ups on all of the important audits that Auditor Bump has done through the years that seem to have been lagging regarding actual follow-up in the legislature or by the administration. One of these that I think is the most salient right now that's been in the news for those that haven't maybe seen that, EEC, Early Education and Care, the commissioner just announced resignation. We found out that the Inspector General was performing an investigation regarding some challenges there. Before that news came out, I had already put it in my social justice and equity audit plan that I wanted to do follow-ups on EEC to make sure that the audits that were conducted that shined a light on the fact that licenses were being given out that shouldn't have been given out, that children weren't receiving the services that they needed to receive, and many other challenges that were taking place in EEC alongside of DCF, I would add in, that those things actually were never remedied and never followed up on. Now, it's great that there's an investigation happening right now and an inspection happening right now, but it is awful to think about the fact that for the last few years, the recommendations of those audits were not actually implemented and followed through on. Those children that experience negative impacts during that time, they don't get a second chance. So we need to make sure that we're doing follow-ups in a timely fashion before and not after significant challenges continue to take place with these young children in the Commonwealth. And that's something that I think should be done across the board regarding audits that have been done in various state agencies.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah, sorry. Literally started sneezing. I'm beating down a cold, so finally had my sneeze that I was working on.
Get well soon.
Yeah, thank you. So the auditor plays a role in improving transparency in our state government, but the availability of the information is only part of the story. People need to see it and be able to use it and access it. How would you make sure any reports that you are putting forth don't just sit on a shelf collecting dust?
Yeah, I would do my best to work alongside of advocacy groups like Progressive Mass to work to come up with ways that we can make information more salient. We have newsletters coming out of my Senate office. I know that obviously we try to utilize our websites here in the state of Massachusetts as much as possible. But I think being front and center and continually beating the drum out in the public eye, utilizing Twitter, utilizing Instagram, and all these different social media outlets is going to be key as well to make sure that, especially that we're helping to bring in younger voters that are, up and coming as the next generation of leaders, to make sure we're engaging with them. I can't tell you enough, Zayda, about how often I've engaged with folks who have said to me, why would you ever leave being a senator to go and be the auditor and go count beans in the back room? And, myself, along with my challengers, we've all had to explain to folks that that's not necessarily what that role is, that it is the role of being the chief accountability officer for the state of Massachusetts and being a quality control manager, so to speak, being a watchdog, making sure to be able to speak truth to power. And it's a management role. So I would seek to utilize social media, work together with advocacy groups who I know have been champions of transparency and accountability, like Progressive Mass, like the Progressive Dems of Mass, like Act On Mass, and other groups, to make sure that we're getting the message out there as much as is humanly possible. But I don't think any one candidate has the answers on a perfect way to do this. So I think that forming a group, forming a task force to talk about ways to increase the visibility of the office, so to speak, on these matters is going to be incredibly helpful. And that's something that I would seek to do.
Awesome, thank you. And so to get to kind of some specific issues, so Massachusetts as a coastal state will be disproportionately hit by the impacts of climate change. what role do you see for the office in strengthening the state's response to the climate crisis?
Yeah, great question. I can say, having represented coastal communities through the years, we are in a climate emergency. Every time there's a big storm, we are in danger of losing homes off the coastline. Every year we have to go back to the administration and essentially beg for relief funds and policy changes to help our coastal communities. And every year is a challenge to get results from this administration and attention to these coastal communities. I would say that as state auditor, what I have already committed to doing, and this hasn't been publicized really as part of my platform, but I've said it in my district when we've been talking about these things, is I would love to do an audit of DCR, DEP, make sure that the funds that are supposed to be allocated towards these causes are actually going to these causes in a manner that's actually proven to be effective. At the Salisbury Beach Reservation, which I currently represent as a senator, we've had a challenging time getting the administration to release funds that were specifically earmarked to help to combat the coastal challenges that we've had here. And we've been denied those opportunities that are supposed to be that we're supposed to be able to obtain. So I filed legislation to try to remedy that issue. As auditor, I will seek to conduct audits of DCR to make sure that those funds are made available. Beyond that, friends, look, we just passed the Next Generation Climate Roadmap. Many of you were a part of this conversation and contributed to the language of that bill. We had to override Governor Baker several times on this bill just to get it passed. When we finally did get it passed, it's been unfortunate to hear that the administration hasn't actually necessarily been implementing many of the recommended changes that we actually passed in the legislature, despite the vetoes of Governor Baker. As state auditor, I would seek to audit relevant state agencies, starting with the Department of Public Utilities, to see where we are falling short in meeting our climate goals that we did set into law through that legislative action, because we do hear that there are some heels being dragged. However, we don't know what issues in particular those things are. So we need to take a deep dive. We need some transparency in that regard. And I'll just take this a step further, just because we do talk about climate change a lot, coming from Lawrence, coming from Methuen. We need to have a focus on environmental justice and also make sure that this is a huge part of the conversation. We here in the Merrimack Valley had our district blown up by Columbia Gas, literally blown up by Columbia Gas. And that was due to the lack of concern from these gas companies regarding important public safety updates that needed to take place in communities like Lawrence, who were largely overlooked. When that happened, I stood up and I took on Columbia Gas alongside of folks from my community, but we haven't seen appropriate follow-up from that time. That's a huge environmental justice issue, making sure that these gas companies are held accountable. I've filed legislation. We haven't seen enough action taken on the filing of that legislation. We haven't seen that legislation's passage yet to hold these companies accountable. So as auditor, I'll continue to champion that legislation, which, as we know, the auditor can still champion legislation and can still go before these legislative hearings. But in addition to that, when we talk about environmental justice, I received a report recently from somebody who works in Lawrence on environmental issues, and it pointed out to me the fact that programs like Mass Save are taking funds out of our payments to these utility companies, because we all pay for the Mass Saves program through our utility bills. And those funds are literally, according to this research that's been done, being taken from our underserved populations and low-income communities and environmental justice communities and being funneled to wealthier, more affluent communities. Now, I have seen this to be true as a senator representing communities like Newburyport and Amesbury, but having also represented communities like Lawrence, Haverhill, and Methuen, that there's been a disparity there in what communities actually see the efficacy of these programs that claim to be about promoting clean energy and environmental justice. We have some data now that suggests that money is simply being funneled from low-income households and sent to wealthier, more affluent households. And I would like to do a deep dive on that. And whatever is under my purview as state auditor, I know I might not be able to do an actual audit because it's not state funded, but doing whatever is in my purview, using the bully pulpit of that office to make sure that we are holding our utility companies accountable by reporting at the very least on these matters regarding these inequities.
Oh, thank you. So in kind of that same vein, Massachusetts is one of the most prosperous states in the country, but we are deeply rooted in racial and economic inequalities. What would you do in that office to kind of address it? You've kind of overviewed it, but I'd love for you to go a little more deep dive into it.
Yeah, so look, as small business chair during the Senate last session, I had the unique opportunity to work alongside of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts and learn about a lot of the racial disparities that continue to exist across the Commonwealth, but specifically as it pertains to state contracting and procurement processes here in the Commonwealth. And for the billions of dollars that we have invested in various state contracting opportunities with businesses here in the Commonwealth and outside of the Commonwealth, the amount of minority contracts that have gone out have been significantly low in comparison with those that have existed through the years. There was actually some great GBH reporting on this that showed the disparities between businesses owned by people of color, owned by women, and other minority populations, that these contracts are going out continuously to the already well-connected.
Oh.
You want to turn that back on before I continue?
Yeah, sorry. We don't know what happened. Little technical difficulty.
Continuation here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I didn't stop it. I didn't stop it, but I clicked to record it again. So
that's great. It just works for me.
We'll fix it in post editing, I'm sure.
Totally fine. So I had worked with BECMA to identify why this continued to occur, because we were coming out with a comprehensive bill that I had drafted called the Mass Makers Act, and we wanted to make sure that we had a specific focus on this challenge in the Commonwealth. We had worked with BECMA. We had come up with some language that strengthened the state's supplier diversity office to empower them to be able to hold the administration accountable on this issue of inequities in our state contracting, because what was happening, according to BECMA, was the administration actually oversees the Supplier Diversity Office through the Housing and Economic Development Office, and the Supplier Diversity Office is charged with overseeing the administration. But they had pointed out to the fact that they can't do their job if they're under the purview of the administration, because they answer to them, they're hired by them or fired by them. And how can they be independent in their assessment of what the administration is doing, whether it be right or wrong, if their jobs are on the line and if their funding's on the line and they're not able to be fully independent. So we had come up with some language through working with them. We had filed it in the Senate. It was shot down, I think, on 3 separate occasions, unfortunately. However, when Governor Baker filed almost the identical language that we had drafted in my office, it was passed unanimously in an informal session. So I will say, I'm grateful that it was passed eventually, and we did get that across the finish line. However, I think that the language needs to be stronger. This is language that was able to be passed unanimously with the support of everybody. And I think that beyond the scope of what that language did, that I as auditor will be able to use my knowledge of that and having worked with BECMA on those issues to continue to hold the administration accountable, to make sure the Supplier Diversity Office is empowered to be able to do their jobs, and that we are following an approach that actually does promote real diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state contracting. I just want to add to that, because I'm very passionate about this issue from, again, having been the small business chair and worked on this and still trying to push a lot of these things through the finish line in the legislature. Massport, they have a great model. Not saying everything's perfect. We haven't been able to do a deep dive into their model over there, but it is the one agency, that's really taken action on working to address this challenge. The Boston Globe did a couple of great pieces on how their model has proven to be successful in some regards with the Omni Hotel project that took place in the city of Boston, and talked about how they were able to actually promote some diversity, equity, and inclusion through their 25-point model that was actually worked on by Ken Turner at the time when he had worked at that office. I've had various conversations with him about implementing that at Massport. And I would seek to, as auditor, do an audit of all state agencies, starting with my own office, to find out how we can start to also implement something similar to that, to start just as a baseline, and then build from there to make sure that we're actually promoting that type of model throughout our state agencies, because that's not occurring right now. That's the only state agency, I believe, that has actually been able to implement that effectively. And we need to take bold action on that front.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And so thinking of different state agencies, so one kind of state agency that's kind of recent news stories have shown and kind of notorious for issues around wastewater and abuse is the state police.
Right.
So I know back in 2020, the legislature voted on a bill to increase kind of accountability within police. You voted for the final version of that bill, but hadn't voted for earlier versions of that bill, and had voted for like during the original Senate debate, some steps to kind of to weaken provisions of the bill. Just curious to hear your general approach. What would your approach be toward ensuring greater accountability for the state police through the role that the Office of the Auditor gives?
Yeah, I think that the state auditor can do a significant amount of audits where need be to deal with the very real challenges of waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think that the Inspector General did his due diligence in producing the report that he did. I would seek to follow up on that report and make sure that the recommendations of that report are being fully implemented regarding accountability, regarding transparency, to make sure that some of the abuses that have indeed occurred in the past do not occur moving forward. In the police accountability bill, we did create the post commission. I would seek to make sure that those provisions are being implemented. But going back to even the criminal justice bill of 2018, I would seek to ensure that the provisions that were implemented in the criminal justice bill are actually implemented as well. We haven't found out really if implicit bias training has been successful at this point. That needs to be something that's audited to make sure that it is occurring the way that it was originally intended. And I would seek to start there and with following up with the Inspector General's report. Thanks, Jonathan.
And Zayda.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's important to know too. So we're going to move to our rapid fire questions. These are kind of fun little things that you won't, have to. The first thing that pops in your head. What was your favorite binge during COVID?
My favorite binge?
Yeah, your favorite binge watch.
Netflix series or something?
Yeah, just whatever you watched when you wanted to just check out and not think about the world.
I watched quite a lot during that time, just to be completely forward on that. I think Ozark I got into during the shutdown, and I am catching up on it. I don't have that much free time anymore, so it's taking me a little while. I tend to fall asleep during it, but I'm trying to catch up.
Great.
And then where's your favorite place in Massachusetts to go if you want to recharge?
To the woods, anywhere where there is a state recreational opportunity, our local parks, our local reservations. I really like to hike. I'm a big hiker. I am a big tree hugger. And I do get recharged when I distance myself from all technology and go out into the woods anywhere that I can and get to be with nature and be present and be mindful and come back to the work at hand.
Great. And who should play you in the movie?
Who should play me in a movie?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. It's not the question I was expected to get. Who should play me in a movie?
I like to throw people off
the last movie person that I've gotten compared to, and this was when I was a child, by the way, not anytime recently. When I was a child, I think it's the curly hair. I used to get compared to Julia Roberts as a kid because I had this big curly mop. So I would just throw that out there. That's just the first thing that comes to mind.
And then where do you get your news? What newspapers, magazines, or podcasts do you listen to?
I listen to a ton. I will say I wake up and probably read Politico and Masterlist first things in the morning. to get my sort of condensed version of the news via those outlets. But also, do subscribe to the Globe. And also, I don't have cable. I will throw myself on my sword with that. I do not have cable, so I don't really get to watch the television news stations. But Politico, Master List, Boston Globe, and then my local newspapers. Again, as a state senator, I am reading local papers like the Daily News of Newburyport, the Eagle Tribune, Rumbo newspaper, and I also speak Spanish. Again, grew up in Lawrence and Methuen, and have been reading El Mundo for years as well.
And then Zayda, do you want to ask the closing?
Yeah. So, when you're out on the trails, I hope you're talking to lots of folks. After someone talks to you, what would you like a voter to describe? How would you like a voter to describe you to their friends and other voters?
Fighting for transparency, accessibility, and equity up on Beacon Hill, speaking truth to power, and fighting for everybody, regardless of their family background, bank balance, or zip code, to have a voice.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thank you so much for spending time with us.